Hello, and thank you for participating in the Commitment to Prevent Hazing module. Before planning courses like this, we begin by establishing learning outcomes, the things that we want you to learn from participating. This module has 4 outcomes. The first is that students will be able to identify attitudes that contribute to hazing. The second is that students will be able to identify hazing behaviors and activities. Third is that students will know how to report hazing. And finally, students will be able to identify positive team building activities. So why does hazing happen? I choose to believe that most people are inherently good and do not want to cause harm to other people. If that's the case, then hazing shouldn't occur, right? Well, let's talk about a few of the things that contribute to hazing attitudes and behaviors to get a better understanding. By no means is this a complete list, but rather things that we have seen in communities across the country for quite some time. First is intent versus impact. Like I said, I believe that most people don't want to inherently cause harm to others, but sometimes our intent is not the same as our impact. Second is the snowball effect. This is when an activity starts out as something positive, but after people add to it over time, it becomes negative. For example, scavenger hunts. These are not permitted by most organizations. One year, it starts out as a game for new members to go around campus to different offices to learn about the resources available to them, and they have to get business cards from the employees in that office. The next year, we have them go off campus to some local venues to learn about the city. The next year, they have to take pictures doing silly things in those locations. The next year, they have to bring back mementos, i.e. steal things. The next year, they're blindfolded, dropped off somewhere, and have to find their way back. It may sound extreme, but this is how it goes. It started out as something positive, and over time, people added to it, and it became something negative. The third is tradition. The old saying, "This is the way it has always been," or "This was done to me, so I'm going to do it to someone else." There's this idea that because it has been done before, it's okay, and that's just not the case. The fourth is a lack of focus on values. Although we are all different organizations, we all have similar values, like service, scholarship, and friendship. If we are focusing on these values, then there is no place for hazing in our organizations. The fifth, and this is at the core of so much that we see, is an attitude of disrespect. I have heard both of these sayings before. You have to earn your letters, and respect has to be earned. These attitudes are rooted in an unhealthy power dynamic between members and new members. These attitudes are the basis for a lot of hazing behaviors that we see, and they are very harmful. Fraternity and sorority life at UAB has adopted a values statement for prevention, which states that we will foster a community of care that emphasizes the human dignity of self and others, giving special attention to issues surrounding hazing, interpersonal violence, alcohol and other drugs, discrimination and bias, and mental health. This statement unifies our philosophy that all people, including ourselves, are entitled to be treated with respect and dignity. Hazing, in addition to the other topics listed, cause harm to self and others that we do not tolerate. So what does hazing look like? I am going to read some scenarios. I want you to take some time, pause the video if you need to, consider whether or not the situation could be considered hazing. For example, what are the potential risks? What is the potential harm that is being caused? And then continue the video. I will debrief each scenario. Scenario 1. Initiated members require new members to drive them around Birmingham. Take a minute to think about this situation. What did you think? This one is actually pretty straightforward because there are many international organizations that have created policies restricting this exact activity. Making new members drive for the chapter and/or members places them in a risky situation in which they could be in an auto accident, which is a physical and financial liability. There are also serious power dynamics in play with active members requiring new members to perform tasks for them, which is an example of hazing. Scenario 2. A chapter requires new members to wear their pins. Take a minute to think about this one. This one is a little more nuanced. It is pretty common for members and new members to be required to wear pins or badges to meetings. That wouldn't be considered hazing. However, if new members were required to wear their pins at all times, and especially if there was some consequence related to not wearing your pin, that could be considered a hazing activity pretty easily. Scenario 3. A chapter has their new member program going late into the evenings. Take a minute to think about this one. This one is also a little nuanced. What is considered late? For me, 9 is late, but that's probably early to some others. The concern here is with exhaustion and deterring from students' academics. If the meetings are occurring so late that it interferes with students' normal sleep schedules, keeps them from studying, or causes them to miss classes, then it would be considered a hazing. Scenario 4. You are walking across campus and see a group of men, all dressed in ties and jackets, walking in a straight line while being yelled at by another man. Take a minute to think about this one. So, what are some of the red flags that you see in this scenario? That they are in a straight line, that they're all dressed up, that they're being yelled at. This is definitely a scenario that would be reported and investigated as a hazing incident because there are so many factors that look like hazing. Scenario 5. A chapter requires new members to learn facts about the organization and administers tests about the information. Take a minute to consider this one. Part of the new member process is learning about the organization that you are joining, and some organizations use tests to determine if new members are learning the information they need to know. What are some things that could make this a potential hazing situation? If there are consequences for failing the tests, such as forced drinking, forced exercise, paddling, or another form of physical harm, definitely. If the tests are so intense or time-consuming that they interfere with regular sleep or academics, then yeah, that could definitely be considered hazing. This is an example of the snowball effect, where we are administering tests to make sure information is being learned, but over time, negative things are added to it, causing it to become a hazing incident. Scenario 6. New members are made to perform embarrassing tasks to entertain the initiated members. Take a minute to think about this one. Something we have already discussed is the power dynamic of requiring new members to perform tasks. This scenario also includes humiliation, which is another form of hazing. This one should be reported and investigated by UAB. Scenario 7. You are at a new member meeting. An initiated member tells all the new members they have to perform physical exercises. Take just a minute on this one. Requiring physical exercise is a form of hazing, but is there a situation in which physical activity might be okay? Sure. If the new member class wanted to do a group exercise class together, or another activity that was led by a business or organization with the appropriate training, facilities, and insurance, and if it was optional, then that could be a physical activity that new members are participating in. However, the scenario of having this activity done during a new member meeting when it would not be appropriate is probably hazing. Let's summarize some of this information. You can probably see that there are some gray areas. We typically don't have enough information to say definitively that an activity constitutes hazing. Ultimately, anything that seems questionable, and especially anything that appears to be causing harm to individuals, should be reported to UAB. UAB will investigate and make a determination as to whether or not the incident violates our hazing policies. Next is that perception is reality. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. If a reasonable person would consider the activity hazing, then it is probably hazing. Consider how something would look from an outside perspective. And last, the individual experience matters. If someone is feeling that they are experiencing hazing, then it doesn't matter if the chapter leadership or members disagree. That new member experienced it. UAB will determine if the activity violates policy, but that person's experience is unchanged. Always consider how those involved could be impacted by the activity. On this slide, you will see how to report hazing if you witness or experience it. There is a tiny URL that you can write down now. You can also access the report from the Fraternity and Sorority Life website. This report goes to the Office of Student Conduct, who will review it and determine what action needs to be taken based on institutional policies and procedures. The important thing for you to know is that you should feel confident in submitting reports even if you are unsure if something is hazing. If there is something you have concerns about, submit a report and let UAB look into it. A report doesn't necessarily mean an investigation will occur or that a chapter will be found responsible for hazing. It just means that something has occurred that UAB needs to look into. Finally, let's discuss some positive team building activities. In the video, We Don't Haze, they described the importance for activities that build community and connection in our organizations. Here are some examples of things that should not be included with positive events. They should not endanger anyone. They should not embarrass anyone. No one should be forced to do things that conflict with their moral or ethical beliefs. And here are some examples of positive events, like get-to-know-you games and icebreakers. You can Google them and literally find thousands online. You can all go to the movies together or maybe go bowling together. You can host a potluck dinner where everyone brings their favorite meal or maybe something that reminds them of their childhood that they want to share with everyone else. These are just a couple of examples. I'm sure you can think of more. Thank you for taking the time to participate in this presentation.